The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and desperation, and under the harsh white lights, Armin Qureshi sat hunched on a cold metal chair, staring at the trembling hands that had just signed away the only thing he had left to give, his blood. He wasn't there for himself. He wasn't even sure why he had said yes. All he knew was that somewhere behind those double doors, a stranger was dying, and somehow, his blood was the only thing that could save him. Before we begin this emotional journey, take a moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of humanity, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Armin had never imagined his life would come to this. Just 5 years ago, he had been a simple mechanic with a small but steady income, a loving wife named Sima, and a newborn daughter who filled their tiny home with laughter. But life, as it often does, had taken everything away without warning. A sudden illness had stolen Sima from him, leaving Armin alone with a baby girl and a mountain of debt. The garage he worked at shut down during a financial crisis, and since then, every day had been a struggle to survive. He now lived in a cramped one-room apartment on the outskirts of the city, working odd jobs, fixing bicycles, carrying goods, anything that paid enough to buy food and keep the lights on. His daughter, Meher, was his entire world. Every morning, he would wake up before sunrise, prepare her simple breakfast, and drop her at a neighbor's house before heading out in search of work. Every night, he returned exhausted, but the moment Meher ran into his arms, the weight of the world felt just a little lighter. That day had started like any other, except Armin hadn't earned a single rupee. By evening, his pockets were empty, and his stomach growled in protest. Still, he smiled as he picked up Meher, pretending everything was okay. But as he walked past the city hospital, something unusual caught his attention. A crowd had gathered outside, murmuring anxiously. A nurse stood near the entrance, her voice trembling as she pleaded with the crowd. A critically ill patient inside needed an urgent blood transfusion. The blood type was rare. Time was running out. They had tried everything, contacted every donor registry, but no match had been found yet. Armin didn't plan to stop. He had his own problems, after all. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the desperation in the nurse's voice. Maybe it was the thought of someone else losing a loved one the way he had. Slowly, almost without realizing it, he stepped forward and asked about the blood type. Minutes later, after a quick test, the doctor looked at him with a mix of relief and disbelief. He was a perfect match. Armin hesitated. He hadn't eaten properly in days. He was weak. He needed to get home to Meher. But then he thought of Sima, of how helpless he had felt watching her slip away. If there had been even the slightest chance to save her, he would have done anything. So he agreed. As the needle pierced his arm, Armin closed his eyes. He didn't know who he was saving. He didn't know if it would even matter. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All he knew was that somewhere, a life might continue because of him. Hours passed. When it was over, Armin felt dizzy but strangely at peace. The hospital staff thanked him profusely, but he waved it off, quietly slipping out into the night. No one asked his name. No one knew his story. And he didn't expect anything in return. He walked home slowly, his body heavy, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. The next morning, Armin woke up to the sound of loud knocks on his door. For a moment, panic gripped him. He had no money to pay rent. Had the landlord finally come to throw them out? But when he opened the door, he froze. Standing outside were two well-dressed men in suits, and behind them, a sleek black car that looked completely out of place in his narrow street. The neighbors had already started peeking through their windows, whispering curiously. One of the men stepped forward and asked, very politely, if he was Armin Qureshi. Confused and slightly nervous, Armin nodded. The man smiled and said something that made Armin's heart stop. The man he had saved the previous night was none other than Xavier Malik, a powerful and wealthy businessman, known across the country. He had collapsed due to a rare medical condition and had been on the brink of death. Armin's blood had saved him. Armin stood there, speechless. He couldn't understand why men like these were standing at his door. Then came the words that would change everything. Xavier Malik wanted to meet him. Within an hour, Armin found himself sitting inside a luxurious hospital room, unlike anything he had ever seen. Machines beeped softly in the background as Xavier lay propped up on the bed, pale but alive. His eyes, though tired, were sharp and filled with something Armin couldn't quite place, gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper. Xavier looked at him for a long moment before speaking. His voice was weak but steady. He said that in all his years of success, wealth, and power, he had never believed in miracles. But last night had changed everything. A stranger, with nothing to gain, had walked into his life at the exact moment he needed saving. Armin didn't know what to say. He shrugged awkwardly, saying anyone would have done the same. But Xavier shook his head. Not everyone would. Over the next hour, Xavier asked about Armin's life. Slowly, hesitantly, Armin shared his story, the loss, the struggle, the endless fight to keep going for his daughter. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't complain. He simply told the truth. And as he spoke, something shifted in Xavier's expression. For the first time in years, the wealthy businessman saw a life far removed from his own, a life of silent sacrifices, of quiet courage, of love that endured despite everything. By the time Armin finished, the room had fallen silent. Then Xavier made a decision. The next morning, the very next morning, Armin's life changed in ways he could never have imagined. He returned home that day thinking it was all over, that it had just been a strange, surreal experience. But the following sunrise brought something unexpected. A convoy of cars arrived in his neighborhood. This time, they weren't just visitors. They brought documents. Xavier Malik had not only arranged for Armin's debts to be completely cleared, but he had also offered him a stable job at one of his companies, nothing extravagant, just a respectable position with a steady income. More importantly, he had arranged for Meher's education at one of the best schools in the city. Armin couldn't believe it. He read the documents again and again, his hands shaking. This wasn't charity. This was a second chance. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at his daughter, who didn't fully understand what was happening but smiled because her father was smiling. For the first time in years, Armin felt hope. But the real change wasn't just in his circumstances. It was in his heart. He realized that a single act of kindness, done without expectation, had created a ripple powerful enough to transform lives, not just his own, but also Xavier's. Xavier, too, changed after that day. He started funding blood donation programs, supporting struggling families, and using his wealth to bring real change. And every time someone asked him why, he would simply say that once, a man with nothing had given him everything. As time passed, Armin worked hard, proving himself every day. He never forgot where he came from. He never lost his humility. And most importantly, he taught Meher the same lesson, that kindness, even in the darkest moments, has the power to light up entire worlds. If this story touched your heart even a little, don't scroll away. Like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. You never know whose life you might change. And before we end, here's something special for you. Comment below with one act of kindness you've done or plan to do. Let's spread positivity together. Because sometimes, the smallest acts create the biggest miracles.